Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Side Quests. I'll be your host for today. My name is Josh, but I also go by the Jorsh or Indie Josh. Now, why Indie Josh, you ask? Well, that's because I'm one of the hosts of IndiePod. It's a podcast dedicated to all things about indie games. Now, if you already know who I am, and you realize that I'm not talking about The Binding of Isaac today, that means you've probably guessed it. Today we're talking all about card games. Slay the Spire in particular. Now, if you don't know me, that joke obviously won't resonate with you, but it'll make sense in a second. In our community, we have a running joke where I'm the resident card game junkie. If you listen every week to our show, chances are I'm probably mentioning a new indie card game that I checked out recently. But I wasn't always this way, and I still often will say things like, oh, I don't actually like card games, or sometimes I'll even say I hate card games. Why? Well, that's basically because Slay the Spire actually changed my entire mentality of card games and whether or not they were the games for me. Slay the Spire is a roguelike deck building game developed by MegaCrit. It includes 4 different characters, all with unique starting decks, available cards, and abilities to find along each playthrough. Essentially, this game is you just playing as one of those characters, climbing up an evil dungeon, defeating baddies, and finding random events, shops, or taking on some challenging bosses. Now, with every playthrough, you'll always start with the same cards, but at the end of each battle, you'll be given the opportunity to add a new card to your deck out of an option of 3 randomized ones. And so this basically seems pretty simple, right? Well, it is, but at the time that this came out, for me, this was the game changer that I needed to become addicted. And I mean hundreds of hours addicted, by the way. For me, card games were just never my thing. I'd look at something like a Hearthstone or a Magic the Gathering, a Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever other card games there are out there, and I'd just say, no thanks. Personally, I hated the deck management portion of it. Spending hours upon hours crafting that perfect combination of cards to outdraw your opponent, only to find out that they created some new strategy of their own, and now you have to spend more hours changing those cards to bring to the next battle. It was just exhausting, it never clicked with me. And trust me, I get it. Some people, this is their jam. They really get enjoyment from this, but it just wasn't mine. Now instead, Slay the Spire eliminates that and brings the randomized fun that I love from roguelikes and turns the game not into how you can build the best deck out of all the cards imaginable, but how can you build the best deck by being flexible and working with whatever is thrown your way. Now you add that simple element with over 350 cards, over 200 items, over 50 unique combat encounters, and 50 random events. And yes, I'm obviously just pulling that from their Steam page. But you add all those together and you have a game that can almost never feel the same, even after playing those hundreds of hours I just mentioned. It makes it so even at the very unlikely chance that you get the same cards in one run, you'll find different persistent abilities or power-ups that will make your character feel entirely different, even with the same moveset. And even at the very, very unlikely chance that you get the same power-ups and the same cards, you'd still get different monsters that you're facing or different random events. So there's always going to be that added element of randomness to it. Plus, once you've beaten it for the first time and you feel so accomplished. I remember when I first played this game, it took me a number of times to get it. And I thought to myself, wow, this seems so impossible. Now when I look at it and I play on, that version, I can always win. But like at the time, it was crazy to me. But once you first beat it, you feel so accomplished. You then realize there are actually 20 harder variations to the game that will make your run more challenging. And it obviously keeps things fresh, but can be quite challenging. They call them Ascensions. And I hate to admit it, but even after all those hundreds of hours, I still struggle getting past Ascension 15. But another key difference for this game is enemy intentions. So when in combat, you know at any given moment what the enemy will do on that current turn. Are they attacking? Are they defending? Are they buffing themselves up? You'll get clear insight into what's coming next. And this is crazy, obviously, when you're thinking of card games because you're normally playing against someone else and you wouldn't know what they're going to do because it would make it too easy, right? And that's the big question here. Does that make the game too easy for Slay the Spire? And the answer is not at all. You will still most likely have a very tough time if you are just getting into this game. And the reason for this is because each enemy will have different forms of attacks, and based on those cards that you're picking up or those power-ups you're getting, you're going to be more suited for certain types versus others. But what it does change is how you really play out the game. Because even though most of the deck building portion is randomized, It makes many aspects still feel very calculated. You know what's in your deck at any given combat, and you know how to best prepare for each turn. It adds depth, especially when you start getting into those higher level ascensions, because things like healing will be reduced, you can't carry as many potions, certain cards will be added that you're not even able to remove from your deck that are just a detriment to you. It forces you to learn how to play high risk, high reward to be able to actually prepare yourself for what's to come next. For me, it was the game that really broke the mold for card games, and I think not even just for me, but for many other games that came after Slay the Spire. You look at the ones I mentioned previously, and they all have a pretty familiar feeling when you think of card games. And I get it, this game is obviously different because it pulls inspiration from an entirely different genre. But Slay the Spire was the card game that I never knew could exist. And it's honestly the reason why I play so many card games now, because there are just so many others that are pulling inspiration from this genre-defining game. If you don't like card games normally, I can't recommend this game enough. You could be the next person that Slay the Spire converts to that card game junkie club. I really hope that even if you don't like card games, you give this one a try. And if you do like card games and you've never checked this one out, shame on you. Like, what are you doing with your life? You should know about this one by now. But anyways, thanks for letting me rant about an indie game I'm very passionate about. Shout out to the Fun and Games crew for having me on. And if you want to hear more about all the awesome indie games that are out there, come and check out IndiePod, where we go on insane rants about the indie games that we love and just a whole lot more. I hope that I've inspired you to check out Slay the Spire, or maybe even just boot it up again for one more run. Regardless, happy gaming.